He thought her camera had captured only memories. But their daughter found one final, hidden photo. The last picture changed everything they believed about her. Would you dare to see what she left behind? The attic window caught the afternoon sun at an angle that turned ordinary dust into something almost holy. Particles drifted through the amber light like snow that refused to fall, suspended in the stillness of a room that hadn't been opened in months. The air smelled of cardboard gone soft with age, of mothballs tucked into forgotten winter coats, of time itself settling into the floorboards. Each step released a creak that echoed through the rafters, wood protesting under weight it had been allowed to forget. Marcus knelt beside a stack of boxes, his movements precise and empty. He lifted the cardboard flaps without looking inside, as though the contents might burn him if he acknowledged them too directly. His hands moved like they belonged to someone else, efficient, detached, performing a task that required no feeling. He had become very good at this over the past 3 years. The art of touching things that once mattered without letting them touch him back. Across from him, Lily sat cross-legged on the dusty floor. A box marked Elena's things open in front of her. She ran one finger along the edge of a label, tracing her mother's handwriting, the looping E, the careful slant of the letters. Her mother had written dozens of these labels in the weeks before the accident, organizing, preparing, as though she'd known she wouldn't be there to explain where anything was. Lily's finger moved slowly, learning the shape of each letter, the pressure of the pen, trying to feel her mother's hand moving across the cardboard. They worked in the space between them like strangers sharing an elevator, careful not to intrude, not to acknowledge the weight of proximity. Marcus pulled out a sweater, forest green with wooden buttons. He folded it once, set it aside, pulled out another, repeated. His jaw was tight, his eyes focused on the middle distance where nothing lived. Lily reached deeper into her box and felt something heavy wrapped in fabric. She lifted it carefully, and the scent hit her before she saw what it was. Lavender, faint but unmistakable, her mother's signature. The silk scarf unfurled in her hands, pale purple catching the dusty light, and inside it, a camera. A Pentax K-1000, black and silver, solid and real in a way that made her chest tighten. She cradled it like something newborn. "I forgot she had this," Lily whispered. Marcus looked up. For the first time since they'd climbed the attic stairs, their eyes met. Something flickered across his face, recognition, maybe, or fear, and then the mask returned. "She stopped using it," he said. "Years ago." "Why?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the camera, but Lily pulled it back instinctively, wrapping the scarf around it again. The movement was small but sharp, a line drawn in the dust between them. 3 years since the accident," Marcus said quietly, as though the words were an explanation, as though time had calcified everything into fact. He sat back on his heels, suddenly looking older than 42. "Maybe we should—" "I want to keep it," Lily said. Her voice surprised her with its firmness. Marcus studied her. This daughter who had learned to make herself small in the architecture of their shared grief. But now her shoulders straightened, pulled back as though the camera itself had weight that demanded posture. She looked less like the girl who tiptoed through the house and more like someone remembering how to take up space. "Okay," he said finally. Lily turned the camera over in her hands, feeling the textured grip, the cold metal of the lens. She pressed the shutter button experimentally. Nothing happened. She turned it over again and saw the film advance lever, the frame counter. Her breath caught. "Dad." "What?" "There's film in it." The air in the attic seemed to thicken. Marcus moved closer, slowly, as though approaching something that might bolt. Lily held the camera up to the light, and he peered at the small window on the back. Frame 36. The roll was finished but never developed. "We should leave it," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "It's been 3 years. The film's probably ruined." Lily looked at him, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, she held his gaze. Her eyes were bright with something that looked dangerously close to hope. "Or it's not," she said. Outside, the sun shifted lower. The amber light deepened to gold, and the dust continued its slow orbit through the attic air. 36 frames, Lily thought. 36 moments her mother had seen through this lens, had chosen to capture, had left behind without explanation. She wrapped the camera back in the lavender scarf and stood, holding it against her chest, like a question she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. But she was going to ask it anyway. Marcus watched her, and something in his carefully constructed distance began to crack. They stayed in the attic until the amber light turned thin and gray. Marcus found Elena's notebook wedged between a stack of old magazines, its cover worn soft at the edges. He opened it carefully, and the pages released a ghost, her perfume, faint but unmistakable, the same scent that still lived in the lavender scarf. His hands stilled. The notebook contained lists in her neat handwriting. Photo locations, dates, weather conditions, notes about light, golden hour at Miller's Pond, overcast, perfect for portraits, morning fog ethereal. The smell pulled him backward through time until he was standing in their kitchen on a Sunday morning years ago, before everything broke. Elena had been laughing, camera hanging from her neck, early light streaming through the window and painting her face gold. She'd been trying to photograph the way steam rose from her coffee cup, impossibly focused on something so small and ordinary. He'd kissed her temple and called her beautiful. She'd caught his wrist and said, "Stay still. The light's perfect." "Dad?" Lily's voice pulled him back. The attic was cold now, the warmth gone with the sun. He closed the notebook, but not before she saw his hands trembling. "Nothing," he said. "Just old notes." She didn't believe him, but she'd learned not to push. Instead, she opened another box and found a shoebox filled with printed photographs. She spread them across the dusty floor like tarot cards revealing the past. Family portraits from holidays they'd almost forgotten. Lily as a child, gap-toothed and wild-haired, laughing at something beyond the frame. Nature shots, autumn leaves backlit until they glowed, a spider's web heavy with morning dew, the lake at sunset turning the color of copper. She was really good, Lily whispered, studying a photo of herself at maybe 6 years old, caught mid-spin in their backyard. Her dress a blur of motion, her face pure joy. "She used to say she wasn't taking pictures," Marcus said, his voice rough with disuse. "She said she was capturing light." Lily looked up at him, and for a moment, something passed between them that felt almost like conversation. Almost like the language they'd spoken before grief made them mute. "Why did she stop taking pictures the last few months?" Lily asked. Her voice cracked on the word months, grief making even simple questions difficult. Marcus turned away, focusing on folding a sweater that didn't need folding. His hands moved faster, creasing and recreasing the fabric. "I don't know. She got busy with work. Things were complicated." It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth, and they both knew it. But Lily had learned that some doors in their house stayed locked, and pushing only made him retreat further into silence. She returned to the photographs, lifting each one with careful reverence. Marcus found himself drawn back to the box, kneeling beside her. Together they sorted through the images, and slowly, piece by piece, Elena came back into the room with them. Not the absence they'd learned to live around, but the person she'd been vibrant, observant, alive. Marcus picked up a photo near the bottom of the pile. Lily at her 8th grade graduation, standing on the school steps in a white dress, squinting against the sun. Elena had been there that day, smiling, seemingly fine. He remembered now how she'd taken a dozen shots, adjusting angles, waiting for the light to cooperate. 2 weeks before she died, he said quietly. The words hung in the dusty air. Lily took the photo from him, studying her own younger face, trying to see what her mother had seen. The gap between that moment and the accident felt impossibly wide, a chasm that couldn't be measured in days. She clutched the photo to her chest and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, deepened, as though the tangible proof of that moment, proof that her mother had been there, had loved her, had seen her, allowed something tight inside to finally release, just slightly. When she opened her eyes, they were bright with tears and determination. "We need to develop the film," she said. "Lily, we have to, Dad. We have to see what she saw." Marcus stood, putting distance between himself and the photographs spread across the floor like accusation. "It's been 3 years. The film's probably ruined. And even if it's not," he stopped, his jaw working. "Even if it's not, what's the point? It won't bring her back." "I know that." Lily's voice rose, sharp with 3 years of silence breaking open. "You think I don't know that, but there are 36 pictures on that roll. 36 things she thought were worth remembering. And we don't even know what they are." "Maybe there's a reason we don't know," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Maybe she didn't develop them because she didn't want us to see. Or maybe she ran out of time." Lily stood, still holding the graduation photo. "Maybe she was going to show us, and then the accident happened, and now we'll never know unless we—" Her voice broke. "Please, I need to see what she was looking at. I need to know what mattered to her." The first real conversation they'd had in months, and it was an argument. But it was also the first time either of them had admitted needing something, wanting something, beyond the numb machinery of survival. Marcus looked at his daughter, 16 now, nearly grown, standing in the gray light with her mother's photograph pressed against her heart. He saw Elena in the set of her jaw, the determined brightness of her eyes. "Okay," he said finally. "We'll develop them." The truck's engine hummed steadily as they drove the 2-lane highway toward town, a low vibration that filled the silence between them. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, hands at 10 and 2, driving with the careful precision of someone who no longer trusted the world to be predictable. The radio played softly, a folk song with acoustic guitar that Elena had loved, though neither of them mentioned it. But Lily saw her father's jaw tighten when the chorus came, and she knew he heard it too. The ghost of her mother humming along in the passenger seat where she used to sit. The camera rested in Lily's lap, still wrapped in the lavender scarf. She traced the outline of it through the silk, feeling the weight and solidness of the thing. Outside, autumn fields blurred past, gold and amber under the late afternoon sun. The light looked like honey poured across the landscape, and she wondered if this was the kind of light her mother had spent her life chasing. The photo lab sat at the edge of town in a strip mall between an insurance office and a closed hardware store. Gravel crunched under the tires as Marcus pulled into the parking lot, the sound sharp and final. He turned off the engine, and for a moment they sat in the sudden quiet, neither moving. Then Marcus opened his door and walked around to Lily's side. He opened her door, a small gesture he hadn't done in years, something from before, when she was younger and the world still made sense. She stepped out, and his hand briefly touched her shoulder, steadying her or steadying himself. She didn't pull away. The contact lasted only a second, but it felt like the first honest thing they'd shared in months. Inside, the lab smelled of chemicals and paper, sharp and sterile. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a flat, colorless glow that made Lily's eyes ache. Behind the counter stood an older woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when they entered, and her expression shifted recognition. Then something softer, something like sympathy. "Marcus," she said, "it's been a long time." "Mrs. Chen." His voice was careful, formal. "We need to develop a roll of film." Lily stepped forward and unwrapped the camera, setting it gently on the counter. Mrs. Chen picked it up with reverent hands, turning it over, checking the frame counter. "A Pentax K1000, she said softly. "I haven't seen one of these in years." She looked up at Marcus, then at Lily. "This was Elena's, wasn't it? I used to develop her film. Before everything happened." The careful word choice, everything contained volumes. The town knew. Of course they knew. Small towns always knew. And they remembered. And they spoke in euphemisms that were supposed to be kind but only made the weight heavier. "The roll's been in there for 3 years," Marcus said. "We don't know if it's still good." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "I'll do what I can. Film is surprisingly resilient, especially if it's been stored in a cool, dry place." She paused, studying their faces. "It'll take 3 days to process. Old film requires more care." 3 days. Lily felt the weight stretch out before her, like a road disappearing into fog. 3 days of not knowing what her mother had seen, what she'd wanted to remember. "That's fine," Marcus said. "Thank you." Mrs. Chen wrote up the order, her pen moving slowly across the form. When she handed Marcus the receipt, she looked at him with something that might have been pity, or might have been understanding. "She had a good eye, Mrs." Chen said quietly. "Elena, she saw things the rest of us missed." Outside, the sun had dropped lower, painting the sky in shades of rust and violet. They drove home in silence, the radio off now, nothing between them but the hum of the engine and the weight of waiting. Lily watched the landscape darken, telephone poles flashing past like a metronome counting down. "Do you think she meant to—" Lily started, then stopped. The words caught in her throat, too big and terrible to say aloud. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles going white. "The police said it was an accident," he said, his voice too rehearsed, too firm, like he was reciting lines he'd practiced. "The weather was bad. The roads were wet. She lost control." But his tone carried no conviction, only the hollowness of a story he'd told himself so many times it had stopped meaning anything. Lily looked down at the scarf in her lap, the lavender silk soft against her fingers. She wrapped it around her wrist, winding it twice, 3 times, until it held fast like a tether to something she couldn't see but needed to believe was still there. That night, she lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling. 3 days felt like forever. 3 days to wonder what moments her mother had captured, what light she'd been chasing, what truth might be waiting in those 36 frames. Outside her window, the moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across her walls. She thought about her mother standing somewhere with the camera raised, looking through the viewfinder at a world the rest of them couldn't see. And she wondered, not for the first time, if her mother had been trying to show them something. If those final photographs were meant to be a message, a confession, a warning, or a goodbye. The first morning, Marcus woke before dawn and found himself in the kitchen, moving through motions he hadn't attempted in years. Coffee brewing, filling the house with its rich, bitter smell. Toast burning in the toaster because he'd forgotten to adjust the setting. The smoke alarm didn't go off, but the acrid scent hung in the air. And when Lily appeared in the doorway, hair tangled from sleep, she smiled faintly at the burnt edges he was scraping into the sink. "You're cooking," she said. "Trying to." He set a plate in front of her, toast salvaged, butter melting. It's not much. It's something. They ate in the pale morning light, and from upstairs came the faint sound of music drifting from Lily's room, a playlist she hadn't played in months. The house felt less like a mausoleum and more like a place where people lived. Tentatively, carefully, but lived nonetheless. That evening, they sat across from each other at the dinner table, forks scraping against plates in a rhythm that bordered on companionable. The silence between them had changed less hostile, more uncertain, like two people learning a language they'd both forgotten. On the second day, Lily returned to the attic. She couldn't stay away. The boxes called to her, each one a door into the past she was no longer afraid to open. She found it wedged beneath a stack of old tax documents, Elena's journal, bound in soft leather, pages yellowed at the edges. She carried it downstairs and sat on the living room floor, the journal heavy in her lap. The entries were sporadic, dated across the final month of her mother's life. Most were mundane grocery lists, appointment reminders, notes about light and weather. But then, 3 weeks before the accident, the tone shifted. I saw something I can't unsee. Lily's breath caught. She turned the page. If anything happens, the truth is in the last light. Her hands trembled. She read the line again, then again, trying to parse meaning from the cryptic phrase. The last light. Was it metaphor? Code? Or something literal, something her mother had photographed? Dad. Marcus appeared from the kitchen, dish towel in hand. When he saw what she was holding, his face went pale, the color draining so quickly she thought he might collapse. Where did you find that? The attic. She stood, holding the journal out to him. Did you know about this? He took it with unsteady hands, his eyes scanning the pages she'd marked. His jaw worked, muscles tensing and releasing. No, I didn't. She never told me. What do you think it means? I don't know. But the way he said it, too quickly, too defensively, made her wonder if he was lying, or if he knew and couldn't bear to say it aloud. By the third day, the air between them had softened further. Marcus asked if she remembered her mother's lemon chicken, and Lily admitted she didn't. Not really. Only the smell of it and the way her mother used to hum while cooking. So he pulled out the old recipe card, handwritten in Elena's looping script, and together they worked in the kitchen. He showed her how to slice the lemons thin, how to season the chicken with salt and thyme. Their hands moved in tandem, his guiding hers. Muscle memory of shared grief beginning to translate into something else, shared presence. Lily felt tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. Marcus saw but said nothing, only squeezed her shoulder briefly before returning to the stove. That night, after they'd eaten and cleaned the dishes side by side, Lily stood at the base of the stairs and looked up at her father. Tomorrow we pick up the photos, she said. Marcus nodded. He moved to the doorway of her room the first time he'd stood there since Elena died, and leaned against the frame, arms crossed, trying to look casual and failing. Whatever's on that roll, he said, his voice wavering but holding. We face it together. She nodded, throat too tight for words. Before bed, she placed the lavender scarf on her pillow, smoothing it out like a talisman. It no longer represented just loss. It had become something else, evidence of her mother's presence, a reminder that seeking truth required courage, and courage required belief that truth mattered more than comfort. That night, they both dreamed. Marcus saw Elena standing in fog, her figure half dissolved in the gray. She held the camera to her eye, lens aimed at something he couldn't see, and when he called her name, she lowered it slowly and looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. Sorrow, perhaps, or warning. Then the fog closed around her and she was gone. Lily dreamed of a photograph developing in a dark room she'd never been in. The image emerged slowly, shadows resolving into shapes, and then light burst from the paper, white and blinding. too bright to see clearly, but carrying with it a feeling she couldn't name. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. She woke, gasping, the scarf clutched in her fist, and lay in the dark listening to the house settle around her. Tomorrow they would know. Tomorrow the 36 frames would become visible. And whatever her mother had seen through that lens, whatever truth she'd captured in the last light, would finally emerge from 3 years of darkness. Lily closed her eyes and tried to slow her racing heart. Somewhere in the house, her father was awake too. She could feel it, the shared insomnia of two people standing at the edge of knowing. Outside, clouds moved across the moon, casting shifting shadows through her window. She thought of her mother's phrase, "The truth is in the last light," and wondered what light her mother had meant. Dawn, dusk, or the final exposure on a roll of film that had waited 3 years to be seen. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects, filling the photo lab with a sound that seemed to press against Lily's temples. The smell of chemical developer hung in the air, sharp and metallic, coating the back of her throat. Mrs. Chen stood behind the counter, holding a manila envelope with both hands, as though it contained something fragile or dangerous. "I printed them myself," she said quietly, looking between Marcus and Lily with an expression that was hard to read. "There's something unusual in the last one." Marcus reached for the envelope, but his hand stopped halfway. Lily took it instead, her fingers closing around the stiff paper, the scarf still wrapped around her wrist like a lifeline. They thanked Mrs. Chen in voices that didn't sound like their own, and walked out into the parking lot where the afternoon sun felt too bright, too ordinary for what they were about to see. In the truck, they sat with the engine off, the envelope between them on the bench seat. Neither moved. Lily could hear her father's breathing, shallow and quick, and her own heartbeat loud in her ears. She thought of her mother's journal, "The truth is in the last light," and understood with sudden clarity that this moment had been waiting for them for 3 years. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope and slid out the stack of photographs. The first image, Lily at the kitchen table, laughing at something off camera, sunlight streaming through the window behind her, turning her hair golden. She remembered that morning now her mother had been making pancakes, had grabbed the camera on impulse, called her name just to capture that smile. The second, Marcus asleep in his chair, book open on his chest, reading glasses slipping down his nose, tender and ordinary. The way love looked in the quiet moments no one thought to record. The third, fourth, fifth, the garden in autumn light, leaves falling like rain, the lake at sunset, their neighbor's dog running through sprinklers. Each image perfectly composed, each one capturing light the way her mother always had, turning the mundane into something worth remembering. Lily moved through them slowly, her vision blurring with tears. These were the last things her mother had seen and chosen to preserve. These small, beautiful moments that added up to a life. And then she reached the final photograph. The world seemed to tilt. Elena in the car, parked on a roadside, dusk light washing everything in shades of amber and shadow. She held the camera at arm's length, taking a self-portrait, her face turned slightly toward the lens. But her expression, it wasn't the calm, composed look Lily remembered. It was terror, raw and undeniable. And in the rear window reflection, caught perfectly in the glass, another car. Headlights blazing white against the gathering, dark, impossibly close, as though it had pulled up directly behind her. Close enough that there was no question it was deliberate. Close enough to be a threat. In the bottom corner, the camera's timestamp glowed faintly. 7:43 p.m. The exact time of the accident. Marcus's hands dropped. The photo fluttered from his fingers to his lap, and his breathing became shallow, ragged, like someone drowning on dry land. Years of accepted narrative, the story he'd told himself, the police report he'd memorized, the words accident and weather and lost control, all of it shattered in the space of a single image. Lily grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve, steadying him the way he'd steadied her so many times when she was small. Their roles reversed in an instant. She became the anchor, holding him to earth while the ground shifted beneath them both. Dad. Her voice came out stronger than she felt, steel wrapped in fear. Someone was following her. He tried to speak, but his throat closed around the words. He could only nod, his eyes fixed on the photograph as though staring long enough might change what it showed. But the image didn't shift. Elena's terrified face, the headlights in the reflection, the timestamp that proved this wasn't paranoia or coincidence but evidence. The word accident dissolved between them, exposed as the lie it had always been. The world outside the truck went silent. No birdsong, no passing cars, no wind. Only the two of them and the photograph and Elena's eyes staring out across time, offering proof she'd somehow known they might need. Proof that in her final moments, she'd been aware enough to document what was happening, to leave them the truth in the last light. Lily picked up the photo with trembling hands. Her mother's face looked back at her, not the soft, laughing woman from the earlier images, but someone terrified and trying desperately to survive. Trying to leave evidence. A message. This wasn't an accident. Someone did this to me. Marcus finally found his voice, broken and small. I should have known. I should have. You couldn't have. Lily's words were firm, though her whole body shook. She didn't tell us. She was protecting us. He turned to her, tears streaming down his face. 3 years of grief and guilt and unanswered questions breaking open all at once. What do we do? Lily looked down at the photograph, at her mother's terrified eyes, at the headlights blazing in the reflection. She thought of the journal entry. I saw something I can't unsee, and understood now that her mother had been in danger, had known it, and had tried to leave proof behind. We finish what she started, Lily said quietly. We find out who was in that car. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute, filled with the weight of 3 years of wrong answers and the terrible knowledge that the truth had been waiting all along, hidden on a roll of film her mother had left behind like a last, desperate gift. Outside, the sun continued its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of rust and gold, the same light her mother had spent her life chasing, the same light that had finally, impossibly, revealed the truth she'd died protecting. Over the next week, their house transformed into something between a detective's office and a memorial. Marcus pulled Elena's laptop from storage, the battery dead, the screen dusty. When he plugged it in and it hummed to life, Lily stood behind him, watching the familiar login screen appear, her mother's handwriting in the password hint, "Where light lives." Lily typed it without hesitation. Everywhere. The desktop opened to folders labeled by date and subject. Elena had been meticulous, organized in a way that suggested she'd known someone might need to retrace her steps. Lily combed through encrypted files, fingers moving with practiced confidence her mother had taught her the basics years ago, saying everyone should know how to protect their privacy. At the time, it had seemed like paranoid caution. Now it felt like preparation. They found the article 3 folders deep, a printed piece about embezzled town funds, annotated in Elena's neat handwriting. Lily's fingers traced the margins where her mother had written names, drawn arrows connecting officials to shell companies, circled dollar amounts that didn't add up. The paper felt thin and fragile, but the words were damning. Marcus discovered the emails in a folder marked simply evidence, unsigned, clinical, the language cold and precise. Drop the story or your family pays. You have 1 week to decide what matters more, the truth or their safety. The timestamp placed it 4 days before the accident. His hands balled into fists, knuckles going white. For 3 years, he'd carried grief like a stone in his chest, heavy, immovable, shapeless. Now it was transmuting into something sharper. Anger, purpose. The clarity that came from finally understanding that his wife hadn't left him through carelessness or fate but through violence, through someone's deliberate choice to silence her. They gathered everything, the article, the emails, the photograph, Elena's journal, and drove to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dawson met them in a room that smelled of old coffee and institutional carpet. He'd been the one to close the case, to write accidental on the report, to shake Marcus's hand at the funeral and say the roads had been wet. These things happened. No one was to blame. Marcus set the photograph on the desk between them. Dawson picked it up, his expression dismissive at first. Another grieving family chasing ghosts, unable to accept the randomness of tragedy. But as he studied the image, his face changed. The dismissal faded, replaced by something darker. Disturbance. Recognition, maybe, that he'd gotten it wrong. The timestamp, Lily said quietly, pointing. 7:43 p.m. The exact time you said the accident occurred. Dawson was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its patronizing edge. I'll reopen the investigation, he said, setting the photo down carefully, as though it might break. This changes things. Walking out of the sheriff's office, Marcus's posture was different. His shoulders were back, jaw set, eyes focused on something beyond the immediate moment. Grief was still there, it would always be there, but it had shape now, direction. Lily saw it in the way he moved through the world, no longer floating but grounded, present. She mirrored him without meaning to, her own movements gaining certainty. They walked through the house like people with purpose, organizing files, making phone calls, tracking down every thread Elena had left behind. That evening, they placed the camera on the mantel, not hidden away in a box or tucked in a drawer, but displayed like the weapon it had become: proof, voice, guardian reaching across death. The Pentax sat beside a framed photograph from the developed roll. Lily laughing at the kitchen table, sunlight painting her golden. Beauty and truth, side by side. Late that night, they sat on the living room floor surrounded by Elena's scattered files. Papers spread in organized chaos, each one a piece of the story she'd been trying to tell. Lily held the lavender scarf in her lap, fingers running over the silk. She was protecting us, Lily said, quietly. She knew something might happen, so she left evidence. Not just the photo, everything. The laptop, the files, the journal. She built us a map. Marcus looked at his daughter, this remarkable person who'd somehow grown brave while he'd been lost in grief. She knew we'd find it eventually. She had faith we'd understand. She's still protecting us, Lily said. He reached across the papers and pulled her close, the first real embrace in 3 years. Not the brief, obligatory hugs at holidays, but the kind that meant, I see you, I'm here, we're in this together. She pressed her face against his shoulder and felt something release in her chest, some tightness she'd been carrying since she was 13 and the police knocked on their door. Outside, the sun had long since set, but the street lights cast a gentle glow through the windows. Soft light, not the blinding brightness of revelation, but the steady illumination that came after. The kind of light that let you see clearly without burning your eyes. Marcus pulled back slightly, looking at the photograph on the mantel, Elena's terrified face, the headlights blazing behind her. I missed so many signs, he said, his voice breaking. She was quieter those last weeks, distracted. I thought she was stressed about work. I didn't. I should have pushed harder. Should have made her tell me. She was trying to keep us safe, Lily said. If we'd known, we might have been targets too. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. 3 years of guilt, of wondering what he could have done differently, and his daughter was offering him absolution he didn't deserve but desperately needed. Tomorrow, Lily said. We keep going. We follow every thread until we know everything. Until whoever did this answers for it. Together, Marcus said. Together. They sat in the quiet house, surrounded by evidence of Elena's courage. And for the first time since she died, the silence felt like peace rather than absence. The camera watched over them from the mantel, and somewhere in the scattered files lay the complete truth, waiting to be assembled. They would find it. They owed her that much. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, small points of light in the darkness, and inside, father and daughter began the slow work of rebuilding what grief had torn apart. 6 weeks after finding the photo, they stood in the courthouse gallery, the building sterile and cold in the way all institutions are. Their footsteps echoed through marble halls that smelled of old wood and paper and the accumulated weight of decades of judgment. Marcus felt the eyes on them, reporters, townspeople, Elena's former colleagues, all watching to see how the family would hold up under scrutiny. Lily sat beside him, the lavender scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. It had become part of her now, not hidden away but worn openly, a visible thread connecting her to the woman her mother had been. Marcus carried the camera in a protective case on his lap, though it wasn't needed today. The photograph had already been submitted as evidence, already done its work. The proceedings were brief and anticlimactic in the way legal justice often is. Deputy Mayor Thomas Greer was arrested for conspiracy and obstruction for destroying evidence, for pressuring the initial investigation to close quickly, for protecting the person who had actually been behind the wheel that night. But that person, the driver who had forced Elena off the road, remained at large, a name without a face, a warrant without an arrest. Justice, Marcus understood, watching the deputy mayor led away in handcuffs, was partial. The truth had been confirmed, but not all wounds could close. Some questions would remain unanswered, and he would have to learn to live with that. When it came time for victim impact statements, Marcus stood. His hands were steady as he walked to the podium. For 3 years, grief had been paralyzing a weight that made even breathing difficult. But now, holding Elena's photograph as he faced the courtroom, he felt clarity, purpose. His grief had transmuted into something that honored her rather than buried him. My wife was a journalist, he said, his voice steady and clear. She believed the truth mattered, even when it was dangerous. Especially when it was dangerous. She died because someone decided their secrets were worth more than her life. He paused, looking down at the photograph, Elena's terrified face, the headlights blazing behind her. But she didn't let them win. She left us proof. She left us her courage. And now we're finishing what she started. When he sat down, Lily reached over and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, and they sat together in the weight of it all, the partial justice, the confirmed truth, the knowledge that they'd done what they could. Outside the courthouse, rain had begun to fall. Not the violent storm of grief, but something gentler, a soft patter against the pavement, the sky crying and releasing at once. Lily turned her face up to it, letting the drops touch her skin. Is this enough? She asked quietly. Marcus looked at the gray sky, at the rain washing the streets clean, at his daughter standing beside him with her mother's scarf around her neck and her mother's courage in her eyes. It's more than we had, he said finally. She gave us the truth. Now we give her the rest we live. Lily nodded, understanding settling over her like the rain. They would never know everything. The driver might never be caught. But they had stopped living in the lie of the accident, and that was enough to let them move forward. They walked to the truck together, neither hurrying, letting the rain soak through their clothes. Marcus opened her door, a gesture that had become habit again, and she climbed in. He set the camera case gently between them on the bench seat. That evening, back home, they hung the remaining photographs from the developed roll on the living room wall. Not hidden in albums, but displayed a gallery of Elena's final vision. Lily laughing. Marcus sleeping. The garden. The lake. Each image a moment she had chosen to preserve. A piece of beauty she'd captured in the midst of fear. The camera remained on the mantel, but it had changed. No longer a relic of death or even a weapon of truth. It had become something simpler, a memory keeper. A reminder that Elena had seen the world through a lens of light even when darkness was closing in. Days later, Marcus found Lily in the kitchen making lemon chicken. She moved through the recipe with practiced confidence now, slicing lemons thin, seasoning the chicken just right. He stood in the doorway watching, and when she looked up, she smiled. "Want to help?" He crossed the room and stood beside her, their hands moving in tandem the way they had weeks ago, but easier now, natural. The grief was still there, it would always be there, but it had made space for other things. Laughter, conversation, the small domestic rituals that made a house feel like home. "Mom would have liked this," Lily said softly, arranging lemon slices on the chicken. "Us cooking together, figuring things out." She would have, Marcus agreed. She always said the best moments were the ordinary ones. They worked in companionable silence, and through the window, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the kitchen counter, the kind of light Elena had spent her life chasing. The kind that turned ordinary moments into something worth remembering. When the chicken was in the oven, they sat at the table with cups of tea, steam rising between them. The scarf lay across the back of Lily's chair. The camera watched from the mantel. Outside, the world continued its slow turn toward evening. "Thank you," Marcus said suddenly. Lily looked up. "For what?" "For not letting me stay lost. For pulling us both back to the light." She reached across the table and took his hand. "We did it together." And in that moment, sitting in the kitchen where Elena had laughed and cooked and lived, they understood that healing wasn't about forgetting or even about justice. It was about this choosing connection over isolation, choosing to honor the dead by fully inhabiting the lives they'd left behind. The light outside deepened to amber and gold, and inside, father and daughter sat together in the warmth, learning how to be whole again. A year after the trial, autumn returned. The leaves turned gold and copper. The air carried the first bite of cold, and the light slanted through the windows at the same angle it had when everything changed. Marcus and Lily stood at the base of the attic stairs, looking up at the narrow passage they'd once climbed with dread. "Ready?" Marcus asked. Lily nodded, the lavender scarf tucked loosely around her neck. No longer armor, but simply part of who she was. One last box. They climbed together, and when Marcus pushed open the attic door, afternoon light poured through the window in shafts of amber and gold. But the space felt different now, warm instead of mournful, full of possibility instead of ghosts. From the kitchen below came the smell of cider simmering on the stove. And when Lily laughed at something she found in the box, a photo of herself as a baby, perched on Elena's lap, both of them caught mid-giggle. The sound filled the attic with life. "Look at you," Marcus said, leaning over her shoulder. "You had the same smile." "I still do." She turned the photo over. On the back, in Elena's handwriting, "My light. October 2009. They spent an hour sorting through the last remnants baby clothes Lily had outgrown, report cards from elementary school, a collection of seashells from a beach trip they'd almost forgotten. Each object was a small doorway into the past, but the past no longer felt like a weight. It felt like foundation. When they finished, they carried the box downstairs and set it beside the others in the hall closet. Not hidden away in the attic anymore, but integrated into the architecture of their daily lives. History didn't need to be locked away to be manageable. It could exist alongside the present, informing it without consuming it. Later, Lily took her camera outside. Marcus had given it to her for her 17th birthday, not Elena's Pentax, which now lived in a shadow box on the living room wall, but a new one, digital, lighter, hers. She'd been learning photography for months, taking classes online, reading the books her mother had left behind, discovering that she had inherited not just Elena's eyes but her way of seeing. She found Marcus in the garden, kneeling in the soil where Elena used to plant tomatoes and herbs. He'd taken up gardening in the spring, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. His hands moved through the earth with practiced ease now, pulling weeds, turning soil, nurturing growth. There was peace in his movements, a settled quality that hadn't been there a year ago. Lily raised the camera and looked through the viewfinder. Her father in golden light, autumn leaves falling around him like slow rain, his face calm and focused. She thought of her mother standing in this same spot, capturing this same light, and felt not sadness but continuity. Love passing through generations, carried forward through attention and care. The shutter clicked. Marcus looked up, squinting against the sun. "Did you get it?" "I got it." She lowered the camera and smiled. The light was perfect. Inside, they hung Elena's shadow box in the place of honor it deserved. The Pentax sat mounted against black velvet, the final photograph beside it, her terrified face, the headlights blazing, the timestamp that had changed everything. The lavender scarf draped over the frame's corner, a piece of fabric that had traveled from attic to courtroom to daily life, transforming with each journey. But the shadow box wasn't a memorial to death. It was a celebration of courage, a reminder that Elena had seen danger coming and had refused to be silenced, had left them proof even as the world tried to bury the truth. The camera had become her voice, reaching across time, and now it watched over them not as a haunting but as a blessing. That evening, they stood together at the living room window, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky turned shades of rust and violet, the same colors Elena had loved to photograph. Marcus's arm rested across Lily's shoulders, and she leaned into him, both of them comfortable in the silence that had once been unbearable. "Do you think she knew we'd be okay?" Lily asked softly. Marcus considered the question, looking out at the fading light. "I think she knew we'd find each other again. That's why she left the proof, not just for justice, but to bring us back. She knew grief could destroy us, or it could show us what mattered. And what matters? This," he squeezed her shoulder gently. "Being here, together, living the life she wanted us to have." Lily nodded, understanding settling over her like the dusk. Her mother was gone, and that would always hurt, but she wasn't lost. She lived in the photographs, in the garden, in the way Lily saw light, and the way Marcus had learned to nurture growth. She lived in the courage they'd found to seek truth, and in the connection they'd rebuilt from the wreckage of grief. The light outside deepened, and Lily lifted her camera one more time. She captured the window, the fading sky, her father's profile silhouetted against the glass. When she lowered it, she saw their reflection, two figures standing together, and in the glass's layered transparency, almost like a third presence, the shadow of the woman who had brought them here. Life, memory, and love overlapping in the space between what was and what is. Grief, Lily understood, wasn't an ending. It was a way of seeing, a lens through which the past and present merged, teaching you that loss and love were inseparable, that the people you mourned never truly left because they lived in the light you learned to see by. Her mother had spent her life capturing light, and now Lily was learning to do the same, not to hold on to the past, but to honor it by fully inhabiting the present. The shutter clicked one final time, and the light remained. Grief doesn't erase love, it transforms it into something you carry forward, like light filtering through memory. The people we lose remain with us, not as ghosts haunting the past, but as presence woven into how we see the world, what we choose to protect, and who we become in their absence. Truth-seeking honors the dead not by dwelling on how they left, but by living fully with the courage they showed us. And sometimes the greatest gift the departed leave behind isn't answers, but the camera through which we learn to capture our own light, proving that love persists not in what we've lost, but in what we choose to see.